All right, in this section, we're going to use the AirCrack suite, and we're going to collect some traffic going across the wireless network. We're going to force a deauthentication event, and then we're going to leverage our capture file to try and crack the password using AirCrack, which is part of the AirCrack suite. So we'll use AirPlay to initially try to capture some of this traffic. And we can sit here on the network and just listen. Occasionally, devices will come onto a given network and go through the authentication process. But if we're not patient, then we can simply force the issue by sending a deauthentication packet. Now, a little bit of background here on WPA. So WPA comes in two flavors. There's a WPA PSK or pre-shared key, which if you look here, most of these are pre-shared key. This is the home network variety of the protocol that you'll see typically on home LANs. And then you've got WPA2 Enterprise, which is what you'll see typically on corporate type networks. So the WPA2 authentication process consists of a four-way handshake, and that's what we're trying to capture here, and we're trying to push it, as I mentioned before, by sending out a deauthentication packet. But this four-way handshake consists of and step one, which is called an A nonce, and this is where the SSID of the access point is broadcast. Now, step two of the process is called an S nonce, and this is where the supplicant, otherwise known as the client, provides their MAC address. Then the access point provides its MAC address in the fourth step, and then finally there's a message integrity check or a hash type check. As an attacker, there's a couple ways that we can try to collect the handshake. And of course, this is one of them. This is what you would call an active attack. And it's active in that I'm actually injecting deauthentication packets. And I'm sending a message to the access point saying we need to drop the authentication and reestablish the authentication process. So in an active attack, this is when you attempt to manipulate packets, in this case using deauthentication injection. That is essentially an active type attack. Now, a passive attack is really where we have no interaction with the target. An example would be just running AirPlay and listening to the network without sending out a deauthentication packet to the access point. Okay, so there's less evidence that we're out there involved or actively involved in the process. So from the logging standpoint of the access point, they could potentially pick us up and see what we're doing as part of an active attack. But for passive attacks, it's just a matter really of being just a little more patient. So now that we've collected some of the handshakes, we can try to crack the authentication passwords. AirCrack is the tool that we'll use to try and do that. So I've got several captures here that we can pick from, and when we open those up, we'll see that we've really captured handshakes from several networks, not just one. We'll go ahead and rifle through a few of these and see if we can initiate an attack. So one thing that I've done is I've downloaded a very large word list or dictionary file, so we can perform a dictionary attack against these captures where we've captured the WPA2 authentication handshake. Okay, so this one happens to be 1.2 gigs, so it's fairly large, but keep in mind, the process of cracking the password is a function of the complexity of the password. And you hear it all the time, which is make sure you have a complex password. Well, in terms of protecting your own networks and security, this is why it's so important, because as an attacker, we have to spend more time and resources to try and crack the passwords when there's increased complexity as part of that process. Okay? So, cracking the PSK or pre-shared key, we can do this locally, which is what I'm attempting to do right now. Okay, and we can also do this using more powerful processing such as the GPU in our video cards, or we can even use the cloud. And attackers are taking advantage of the cloud and uploading, these captured handshakes and using some of the fairly cheap, inexpensive cloud processing cycles that are available to really run as many test keys as possible, as quickly as possible. And you can see here, we're running about 500 keys a second, which isn't terribly fast, right? We don't know that this dictionary file is going to contain that actual password, right? But you can see that we're kind of going through some variations in H, right? In the H letter of the alphabet. So this can be extremely time consuming, and there's no guarantee really that we're going to crack the passwords. Using a tool like John the Ripper is another alternative in going brute force. But if you're going to go down that path, which means stacking up multiple graphical processing units, or using 10 large instances of a server in an Amazon web service configuration, right? So, and attackers that are serious will do these type things. They might register free instances of Amazon. So another thing we're going to look at here is Wi-Fi protected setup security. Okay, so WPS is where, you've seen this in your home networks, where you press the button, it says WPS, and you initiate a manual sync between, let's say, an access point and a gateway or device in your network without having to enter a password. Okay, so this is a nice convenient feature, but it involves a PIN of 8 numbers. Okay, now the 8th digit in this equation is a checksum, and the tool, by the way, that I'm using here is Reaver. So it's a free open source tool, like all these tools that I'm using, that allows us to leverage and the address of an access point. So I use AirPlay to look at the access points that are out there, and then I'll pick the BSSID, or essentially the MAC address of one that I want to conduct a WPS attack on. And then we'll use Reaver to try to initiate that attack. All right, so but back to some of the numbers. I said that the PIN is an 8-digit number. So when we're brute forcing this, really what you have, since the 8th number is a checksum, is you have 2 blocks of numbers you need to crack. The first is 10 to the 4th power, the second is 10 to the 3rd power. And typically in 2 to 14 hours, you can crack the key space. However, vendors have really gotten around this from a security perspective by instituting rate limiting, and you can see that here in our example. Click on the webofsecurity.com link for the latest in cybersecurity news, test prep materials, including sample test questions, flashcards, ebooks, hands-on labs, study notes, and special offers for newly released cybersecurity training content.